I'm not pulling on my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for the Drive to Work at Home edition. So I'm here with Barry Reich, a longtime Magic player, and he's the answer to one of my favorite Magic trivia questions. So the trivia question is, who are the very first two people to ever play a game of Magic? Now, most people can guess Richard Garfield. That's the easy answer. But the other person is Barry. So welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here.
So I want to go way back. So let's talk about your first experience ever with Magic, which was the very first, other than Richard, the very first experience anybody ever had with Magic. So can we tell the story of your very first time playing?
Sure. So I met Richard in grad school, University of Pennsylvania. He was doing math, I was doing computer science, and we met at the Bridge Club and hit it off. We both love games. Richard, from the beginning, he was always into creating games, Magic, chess, whatever. It was always something interesting. And one day after I knew him for, I guess, a year and a half, he came up to me. He called me Bit, by the way. So he said, "Hey, Bit, I created this little game here. You want to give it a try?" So I said, "Sure." So we went into the astronomy lounge, which had no windows, and we played the very first games of Magic. It was on cardstock. It looked, roughly like it does today, with mana costs on the upper right and a title and land and creatures. It was 120 cards. You just shuffled it, split in half, and we just started playing. And from the very first game, I was hooked, and it was amazing. We played and played and played. I thought it was 3:00 in the morning. I thought it was 4:00 in the morning. I said, maybe we should go home, even if it's Sunday. So we called it a day, and it turned out it was 9 in the morning. It was just, we had played for 12 hours. And that was the first experience. And it was so much fun. And immediately, like, the next few days, we got a bunch of his friends, our friends, together and started playtesting. And it was about 10 of us playtesting, then 15, then 20, then closer to 30 across Philadelphia, until 1993, when he went out to Wizards of the Coast, and you all know the rest.
Okay, so I want to get in, what was it like playtesting? So, how did you playtest? What were you given? What did you have?
So the first deck, again, was 120 cards. So immediately we went to, the printer room. He had cardstock. We put printed cards from the computer onto cardstock. We copied it. I believe the very first playtest sets contained 2 of each rare, something like 13 of each uncommon, and maybe 45 of each common. And he just basically split it up, randomly among all of the playtesters. So it was a very closed environment. You knew that there were 2 of, if it was rare, there were only 2 of them. And so if you really wanted to go, we would trade for them. We would play for ante. The first couple of years, everything was for ante. So you'd ante your top card and then play. And, you could lose a land or you could gain a dragon. Usually I'm the one who gained the dragon, but I was just lucky. So, and it was very interesting, the whole playtest environment, because it was almost like a little stock market. There were cards that were obviously powerful, and it took a lot to trade for those. Lands were worth next to nothing, especially planes. They're a little stronger now, but people didn't like playing. Everybody wanted to play a red-blue power deck at the beginning. But there was plenty of other things that you could do. And I just remember that every once in a while, a card, somebody would figure out an interesting use for a card that nobody else had considered, and all of a sudden its value would skyrocket, right? So that's why I say like a stock market. And I remember I always went to Richard and said, I'm going to try to build a deck that's all artifacts, or a deck that's 5 colors, or a deck that's like this or that. And a lot of these decks are actually in the credits for me in the very first booklets. I don't know if it's still there. Mm-hmm. Is it? And he would say, "No, I don't think you're going to be able to do that. Like, how can you build a deck of all artifacts?" So I did. I went and got 7 of the 10 Moxes, a bunch of soul rings and just artifact creatures, and I could pretty much play my hand on the first turn and attack and kill you before you could do anything. So he was impressed by that. When I traded for the one of the Mox Emerald, I traded with Howard Kallenberg, and he said, "Well, basically that's just a forest. So why don't you give me a forest, and I'll give you my Mox Emerald." And so that was the first Mox trade. They're a little bit more powerful than that now. So and one time this guy, I forget his name, he had a JMD tome or something like that I really wanted. So I went to him. Ethan, I think his name was Ethan. I could be wrong. Sorry, but I went up to him and I said, I'd like to trade for that. And Richard was around, and he saw what I was doing. I said, I'll give you a serpent for it, because I had a lot of serpents. I was the Serpent King, and Richard said, "Oh, don't do that. That's terrible. I'll give you a serpent." He said, "Well, you're not offering any more." "No," Richard said, "I'll give you a serpent just to talk to me and make a trade with me instead." So I basically took Richard aside outside of the room. I said, What do you want for me to leave? To leave? So he said, give me this or that. So I gave him a card. He walked away, and then I went and traded for the tome. But Richard tried to keep me honest, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things that's really interesting about the early playtesting was it was all constructed. Like limited came later, right? Did you guys test any limited in the early days?
Limited?
Like drafting.
Like drafting or any sort of thing. Like mostly you were just playing constructed, where you just had cards and you built on the cards you had, right?
Yeah. So you whatever cards you had, you'd build a deck, you'd trade for other cards, or you'd win them in ante, and at the time it was a 40 card deck. So you'd build your 40 card deck and play, and keep changing it. At first, that's all we did. I don't remember exactly when, but it could have been several months, maybe a year after we started playtesting. I actually came up with the draft where everybody opens a booster, picks one, and then passes it to the left, and picks one and passes it to the left, and so on. And then you have 15 cards. Then you do it again, passes to the right. You do it again, passes to the left. And I forgot what that's called now, but
it's called Booster Draft. So you're the creator of Booster Draft.
Yes, I am the creator of Booster Draft.
That's very cool.
Yeah, we played some team games. And then somebody, not me, came up with the idea of a league. So we took a bunch of playtest cards, stamped some unicorn or something on the back, so we would know that these cards are for the league, draft league. And honestly, I don't remember how that works, but there were these other versions. We played something called a melee. I think it was called a melee, where there were like 16 of us, or 17 or 18. Everybody sat in a circle, and every second or third person, I forget which, had a little token, so it was their turn, and you could only attack the person on your left or right, I think.
Yeah, it's called Grand Melee. The format's called Grand Melee.
That was something that happened probably at the very end, like right before everything was published. That was fun.
So one of the things that's very interesting, one of the things that Richard was very interested in and had you guys do was, like, trading was a big part of early Magic, of playtesting, right? Like, a lot of it was, you'd figure out a deck you wanted, then you had to go figure out how to get the cards that you needed to build that.
Exactly.
And, okay, so you built an artifact deck. You said did you build your 5-color deck? Did that work?
Yeah, I built a 5-color deck. I think I used dual lands and moxes. Once I traded for the moxes, I kept them. I knew how powerful they were. And I just basically threw in 3 spells from each color and 3 powerful creatures from each color. Mm-hmm. And, on my second turn, I'm getting a dragon in play. And on my third turn, I'm getting a vampire and an angel. I mean, it was a powerful deck. Of course, I was using some of the Power 9 cards, since, I recognized them very early. Not all of them, but many of them, and traded for them.
Did you have a Lotus? Did you have either of the 2 Black Lotuses?
I don't remember. I really don't remember if I had a Black Lotus in there.
7 of the 10 Moxes is quite impressive. So.
Oh yeah. It was 7 Moxes and 8 Soul Rings.
Wow, that's very impressive.
So yeah, so I mean, I did. That's basically all I needed, right? Every hand I got, I could pretty much play almost my whole hand on the first turn or two.
So, obviously we talked a little bit about sort of the nature of how you guys played, but like what? So you started with 15 people and it grew over time.
Yeah.
When did this happen? Like when you talk about playing the first game of Magic, what year was that? Do you have a rough idea?
I believe it was 1991.
Okay, about 2 years before the game came out.
Yeah. I'm about 90% sure of that. And yeah, so at first it was a small group mostly of people that Richard knew in the math and physics departments. And then later on, it grew to my other gaming friends from the Bridge Club, Bill Rose and Charlie Catino, whose name they never spelled right, and Don and
Joel Mick and
yeah. So then later on, I added about half a dozen people from the computer science department.
So like Scaff and Jim, were they early or were they later?
They were early.
They were early. Okay. So just for the audience, real quick for the audience, Scaff and Jim and Dave and Chris were the people, the East Coast playtesters that would make Ice Age. Bill and Joel and Charlie and Howard and Don, they were the group that made Mirage, for example.
Right.
So here's a good segue. So the game hasn't yet come out, but Richard's like, well, one day, at some point in the future, we might need more sets. And so he had different people work on different sets. So, Scaff and Jim and company made Ice Age. Bill and Joel and company made Mirage and Visions. So let's talk about what you did, because you made your own set. So let's talk about Spectral Chaos.
Right. So when I saw other people were making their own sets, I thought, well, that'll be fun. I had a lot of ideas. For example, I talked to Richard about the fact that there was no multicolor in the game. I think there was exactly one multicolor card in the initial release. I forget which one it is, but
there was a card that had an activation in another color, but there was no multicolor cards in the first set.
Right. Well, so
Sedge Troll had a red card with a black activation. That was in alpha.
Yeah, okay. So my thought was that I wanted to make multicolor work. So I wanted to come up with all kinds of ideas that would make it, make your deck better if you had more colors, punish you if you didn't have enough colors with certain cards. And then also, I like the idea of breaking the rules wherever possible. And so that's the chaos part. And in the end, Magic is made on 3 sheets of 11 by 11. So that's 363 cards, minus a few because a lot of them are lands.
And then this is early Magic did that. Our card sets are a little different now, but way back in the beginning, that's how they were made.
So I had so many ideas at the time that I added a 4th set, so I added 121 more cards. So there was very rares, and
Magic would go on later to have mythic rares. So
yeah. So I went through the rule book. I just tried to think of crazy, interesting things, cards that end the game in a tie, 5-color cards. Spectral Chaos, in fact, was 2 of each of the 5 colors, so it cost 10 to cast. And when you cast it, you put everything down, get up, switch seats with your opponent, and now you're playing his deck. And you're still trying to win.
Yeah.
So, it was just a lot of fun. Everything I ever wanted to see, they put in, I put in, and a lot of the ideas for multicolor have been published. They did buy the set from me, not for very much, but we won't talk about that. And over the years, there's still on occasion I see now that they're printing some idea that I had come up with at the time. I'm not trying to boast here or anything, but I had a lot of help. We came up with so many different ideas.
Let me pick up the story real quickly from the Wizard side, because I was involved on the other side of this. So so what happened was Bill Rose and Mike Elliott and I were doing a set called Invasion. And where Invasion started was, we knew we wanted to do a multicolor set. We wanted to do, actually, a multicolor block is what we were interested in, is, the whole block, all 3 sets were going to be multicolored. And Bill was well aware that Spectral Chaos existed, so the very first thing we did on the very first day was we looked at Spectral Chaos, and our favorite thing from Spectral Chaos was what we called the Barry mechanic. So but now the audience will know it's Domain, is what it's now known in the game. So let's talk a little bit about how Domain came to be. How did that come about?
Is that the one where...
you count how many different basic land types you have. Yeah.
Right. So, again, I tried to come up with as many ways as I could to encourage multicolor use. So one thing that was sort of... I don't know how it popped into my head, but it seems obvious now, looking back. I thought, okay, well, let's create X spells where X is a number of different types of land you control. So, it might be like a lightning bolt type of thing where instead of it doing 3 damage, it does X damage for the same cost, where X is the number of basic land types you have in play. So if you have one of each in play, you're doing a 5-point lightning bolt with, that costs 1, and so on.
That was our... So I know Invasion, that was the one mechanic that we used from Spectral Chaos. And there were a lot of individual cards we used and a lot of concepts we used. So if for the audience, if they enjoy Invasion, a lot of the inspiration for a lot of stuff in it came from Spectral Chaos. That's kind of where Spectral Chaos, some of it, saw light today. Mm-hmm. So here's go ahead.
If you want to see what Spectral Chaos looks like, a couple of fans have put up websites. So if anybody wants to do a search, they'll find Spectral Chaos.
Okay, so if you search for Spectral Chaos, there's fans that have. So do you have a couple cards in front of you? Can you read me a card?
Sure.
So while you're looking, real quickly, let me just finish the story, and then you can give you a little chance to look. So one of the things that's really interesting is when we first used Domain. We referred to it as the Barry mechanic, and it inspired something we called Barry's Land. I don't know whether you had Barry's Land or we just named it after you because it worked with the Domain mechanic. But the idea of a 6 basic land type that would make your Domain spells go from 5 to 6. And we've never quite made the card. We've made things that are similar, but not exactly the 6 land type. But that... if people ever know about Barry's Land or Barry's mechanic, that this is the Barry for the people like, where does that name come from? Why did we call it that? This is the Barry behind Barry's Land or the Barry mechanic.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so did you find a card or two?
Oh, yeah. Here's one of my favorites. Screaming Mimes. 1 black-green. At the beginning of your upkeep, Screaming Mimes deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. A lot of times, I thought of a concept, a name, like for a card, and then I came up with what I thought the card should be, and that's what Screaming Mimes is. There's also a Screeching Mimes, which is rare, and it costs like 5 or 6 to put into play, and it does 3 damage to everything. So that's just one of my favorites.
Yeah, the other thing, real quickly, historically, just for the audience to understand, like, one of the things that's really interesting, like, I went to film school, and you'll watch a movie from way back when, and it seems very mundane in the sense that, it just seems like a boring movie. It just seems like... But the movie did things for the first time you've never done before. Like, I remember watching The Great Train Robbery, and, we're like, what's so special about this? And the teacher was like, well, this is the first time they bounced back and forth between 2 locations, and it was the same place. Like, they invented that. And the thing that's really important to understand here is... multicolor cards weren't a thing. When you made this, there was no such thing as a multicolor card. Legends would come along later, but Legends was designed later. You designed this before Legends got designed.
Yeah, and Legends did not really stay true to the colors. They just, as far as I can tell, randomly picked 3 colors for different things. When I designed this, I was very, very careful to stay true to the colors. So black would do what black does. If it's black and red, it would somehow combine those 2 things. And then a big part of the set, though, was the chaos part. Anytime you had 2 or more opposite colors in the casting cost of a spell, like if it was a red-blue card, it would necessarily be chaotic. And it would say on it, chaotic enchantment or something. And then there was a whole group of cards that would affect chaotic cards, like destroy target chaotic card or something along those lines.
And it crossed over lots of different card types, I assume.
Yeah. Every combination was in there. Every combination of 1, 2, or 3 colors was in there, and there were a few 5s.
Okay, so you had all the 2s, all the 3s, and 5.
Yes.
That is chaotic.
Yeah. I just happened to find some other cards here that are kind of fun.
Okay, let's hear.
I mean, they're not all multicolor. So, for example, Black Widow is 4 black. It's an 8/8 creature, but any damage done to it, you put a -1/-1 counter on it. So it starts out as an 8/8 creature for 7, but it gets smaller as it's damaged. So if you block it with a 5/5, then now it's only a 3/3 creature.
And it's quite possible when you made that card, there wasn't such a thing as a -1/-1 counter, right? I don't know. Alpha, for example, had -1/-1 counter. They had +1/+1 counters.
Empires.
Fallen Empires was the first one to -1/-1. Okay.
Yeah. I had +1/-1s, -1/+1s, whatever combination I could come up with.
Yeah, early Magic had, when you got into the Dark and Fallen Empire stuff, there started being a lot more combination of different counters. But that's one of the fun things of looking back is the idea that you made this, like, Magic came out in 1993, and you probably made this in 92? When did you start making Spectral Chaos?
Yeah, so I started in 92. I was still putting the final finishing touches on it, like the 4th version, when Magic came out.
So you went through 4 different versions? How many versions did you go through with Spectral Chaos?
Yeah, 4 different versions.
And the finished product was how many cards?
484 cards, minus a little bit because of the number of lands on the common sheet.
Sure.
So, I don't know, probably about 450 cards.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, as somebody who was behind the scenes, who obviously played Magic for 2 years, I just want to talk a little bit about seeing it actually come out. Like, what was your sort of vantage point of seeing Magic become what it became? Like, did you go to Gen Con?
Yeah, I went to the first couple of conferences. My name tag said Richard Garfield's personal bodyguard. And I tell you, I had the opportunity to invest in it. And being a graduate student, I didn't have any money, so I didn't. And if I did, I would have been a millionaire. And it really took off. I mean, I'm sure you were part of the taking off period, and all their predictions at the beginning, like when they thought they were going to print and sell their millionth card, they were actually selling their billionth card. Yeah, it just skyrocketed, as it should. It's an amazing game, and it's very well deserved. So you see people make a lot of money because they're lucky. Richard didn't get lucky. He created an amazing game, and I'm so happy that it did what it did.
Is there a moment? I mean, obviously, when you first started playing it, you recognized how great the game was. But can you remember a moment where you're like, "Oh, this is going to be a giant success"? Where like you realize that the world was going to recognize what you recognized as how good a game it was.
I knew it was a fantastic game as we were playtesting it. I had no idea it was going to take off the way it did until after it came out. Because again, if I did, I would have found the $1,000 to invest. So yeah, it just.
But what I'm saying is, I'm looking for the story. Maybe it's at Gen Con. Like, can you remember where like you first realized how big it was going to be? I mean, do you have some idea of that? Or no? Like it just you never really got the scope of it till it happened.
Maybe I didn't. I mean, where I saw that people were actually going to be making money on this was when Legends came out, and like as an original shareholder, I didn't buy any stock, but Richard gave the playtesters a little bit, and so since we were shareholders, we got 5 boxes of product for the first 8, 9, 10 sets that came out. They stopped doing that eventually, but I remember Legends came out and everybody wanted the Legends boxes because they could turn around and sell them for $700, $800, $900. And I think that was the first time I saw, okay, this is going to make a lot of money. This is going to be just so big. But I unfortunately I didn't see it before then. Even when I went into the game, one of the local game stores, and I saw, they had one box of it, and I bought like 5 or 6 decks. I even at that point I had no idea. I just didn't. I don't think anybody did.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. There's a documentary that's being shot, and the clip of me that they put in the little trailer for the documentary, I was very excited because the very first time I played it, I called my dad, and I'm like, Dad, this is it. This is the next big thing. This is the next Dungeons and Dragons, is what I said to him. And I was just really, really, really excited. And I got the scope of it really early. And it's almost hard, although I've talked with Richard a lot about sort of like, no one makes a game that ends up being Magic in the sense of like, no one understands that scope. Like I know one of the issues is, for example, when you were playtesting, do you remember Ancestral Recall being common? Do you remember that?
It was common? No,
yeah, originally the boons were all common. And then very, very quickly, Richard figured out it shouldn't be common, and I think he moved it up to rare. But I believe there was like a point in time very, very early where they were all common. And then he just moved it because obviously, like, everything else is common. All the other ones are common, but...
Although he didn't like the idea of taking a card that was too powerful or very powerful and just making it rare. Because when the game came out, then basically if you were rich enough to go out and buy enough boxes, you would get all of these cards. But the people who could only afford to buy a little bit weren't going to do as well. So he tried to avoid that. We all did. Like we tried to balance the cards rather than say, okay, well, this is super powerful, let's just make it rare.
Yeah, I think that Ancestral Recall's problem was it was locked into a cost. Because the whole cycle were 1 mana and they did 3 things. Like, there wasn't a lot of flexibility. It's not the kind of card you can easily recost because it's sort of tied to its cost. I think that's uniquely in its case for that.
Yeah. And he also went by the philosophy of life isn't fair. So if some people, if somebody gets a really powerful card, they get a really powerful card. And as it turns out, that probably helped to have Magic take off the way it did because people would get these really cool cards and they'd be so excited and they'd go out and buy more decks because so they could find other really cool cards, So even though we tried to balance things, if it wasn't perfectly balanced, that was okay.
And another thing for the audience to remember, Richard made the game assuming it was a normal game. So people would, go buy a couple decks and a couple packs. Like, they would buy a normal thing that you would buy for a normal game. And, hey, in that mix, if everybody playing has... 3 starters and 3 boosters, just your little meta game. Hey, maybe there's one Ancestral Recall in the meta game. Maybe one person has one of them. Having powerful cards is much less problematic when within the system there's not a lot of them. But it was hard to anticipate how big the game would become. Where people like it's funny. You talk about how you went out and collected all the Moxes to build your very first deck. The idea that someone could make a deck full of Moxes is very hard to do. In the scope of what Richard originally imagined, right?
Right.
So,
and I was just going to say, the whole stock market thing that I mentioned at the beginning. Also, even after the game came out, there were still cards that people figured out some clever way to play.
Yeah.
Like Channel Fireball, right? Nobody in playtest, I don't even think anybody used Channel much because, or if they did, it would be to cast something small. But I mean, that's brilliant and it's simple. And then combinations of 2 and 3 cards very quickly started to take off. And Richard liked that. He didn't want to design a game so that this is the way you play it. You get all the red cards and the blue cards, and that's how you're going to win. He liked the idea. And I think we all did that. Let's just create interesting cards and let the audience figure out what to do with them, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I think that's one of Magic's. I mean, there's a lot of cool things about the game, but one of the things that really drove the game, I think, early on especially, was yeah, you, the audience, you figure out how to play this. You have a lot of freedom to play the way you want to play. And it's neat to hear about, even in the early playtesting, how many different formats you guys invented before the game even came out. You know, that's cool to hear. That even at the playtest level, you guys were like, what else can we do? How else could we play that? So that is really, really cool to me. So I'm at my desk here, so I'm almost to work. So any final thoughts, or like when you look back at sort of at the early days of Magic, sort of like what is your, I don't know, any memory you haven't shared yet, that just sort of a fond memory of the early days of Magic, the early days of Magic?
I mean, almost all of my memories are fond. You know, it was just such a fun time. You know, I mean, that's all I can say. I enjoyed almost every minute of playtesting, and you know, and then for years after it came out, collecting cards and playing, and then eventually teaching my son, who's 13, and you know, and he beats me all the time. So you know, it's just so much fun.
Well,
it's go ahead.
Oh no, so finish. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game, and it's well deserved. You know, like Richard just you know, hit the jackpot and created something that's just incredibly good. You know, it's a worldwide phenomenon. I can't say enough about it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being with here today. It's really, really fun to me hearing a lot of the early. I mean, I've been involved in Magic for a long time, but you're talking about a time that I was not involved, so it's really cool hearing the super early story. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And to everybody else, I'm at work, so we know what that means. It means it's the end of my drive to work, so instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. So thank you for being with us today, Barry. And I'll see all of you next week. Bye-bye.